Hello everyone and welcome back to SGTV. We're going to be talking today about how the UK wiring compares to abroad, such as Australia and the USA. Now when we talk about trades, we often get told how you can take these trades anywhere in the world. So I want to talk about just how easy or how true that is. So today we're joined by our technical support engineer from Scolmore, Dave Anderson, and we've also got Boyd from Certon, who we've had on the show before. Thank you both for joining us today. Dave, we'll start with you because we haven't had you on the show before. Just give us a quick introduction to yourself and your background in the industry.
Right. Originally I was in the military and I was stationed in this country. I was an aircraft electric specialist in that. I spent quite a few years doing that. And when I left, I decided to stay here for a short time, which ended up being a long time. And during that time, I've done lots of different electrical work. And at one point, actually, I was as a self-employed electrician. And then I eventually, after many years, I've ended up here in Scolmore. The position sounded quite attractive when I looked at it. And when I was here, I was a very good company to come with and work for. And that's kind of where I am now, really. That's the short version.
Okay. So we'll get a bit more into that as we go through some questions. Boyd, we've had you on the show before, but if there's anyone out there watching who hasn't seen Boyd before, Boyd, could you give us a quick brief history about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm an electrician for 32 years now. Been in the game since my dad gave me a job, and I've never looked back. Been around the world couple of times, lucky enough to do it a couple of times, worked in a couple of different countries, and obviously come back and had a little idea about another way of issuing documents, which is my other company called Certon. So I'm still an electrical contractor, still got a business running, doing very well, and obviously got the other company Certon. So yeah.
Okay. So as I mentioned on the introduction to this, you often get told when you're getting into trades, all various trades and engineering things, that kind of background, you always get told you can take it anywhere in the world. You could go New Zealand, Australia, Iraq, Saudi, anywhere. So let's start with you, Boyd. You've been in Australia and New Zealand, is that right?
Yeah. In my sort of mid-20s, I decided to do a year's travelling with a friend or a couple of friends, and we all decided to go to Australia and stop off along the way in places like Thailand, Malaysia. That wasn't to work, that was purely for fun, just to have a bit of travelling around. And when we got to Sydney, I basically went straight into a hostel, as most travellers do. You have to get a work permit, obviously, before you go, or sort of a permit to stay there for the year anyway. You can't just turn up. And then, I went straight to an agency and just said I'm a Sparky from England and I've got qualifications. And I think the very next day they phoned me and said, do you want to start work? And I basically worked for about 9 months in Sydney, in and around. And yeah, absolutely fantastic. I earned all my money in Sydney to travel for the next 3 months around the whole country. Spent
it all really quickly?
Very quickly, yeah. Yes.
So it's interesting you say that. So the qualifications you've got in the UK allowed you to work almost immediately in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, this is 20 years ago now, and Australia, and I'm not sure about New Zealand, because like I say, I did go to New Zealand a few years later after I got married to wife, and I ended up there in Auckland for at least 6 or 7 months working as a Sparky there. But in Australia now, I actually phoned my friend who lives in Queensland last night, and I just asked him a few questions. He's working as an electrical estimator out there, doing a lot of fire alarm installations as well. And the rules and regulations now in Australia are very stringent on how you can work as a Sparky. So at the time, I believe we ended up asking the agency for a job, as I'm an electrician, can I have a job please? And they said, yeah, if you're a British qualified Sparky, no problems at all. And they didn't even ask me at the time to see any paperwork, which,
wow.
Fine. I had the paperwork with me, copies of it, but I didn't need to actually produce them and show them.
Yeah.
Now, 20 years ago, the laws will change, you know, things might have been different, and they might have had a lot of work on it at the time. I just wanted you in. We did get paid as an electrical improver rather than, you know, an electrician. So, yeah, so that was definitely an easy route in. We just, you know, just had to say I'm a Sparky. I know now they've got a big thing about having a license to practice. So you have to have a license, you have to have the qualifications, or you can just be an electrician's mate as such.
Yeah. Dave, I want to ask you the same question. I know we spoke about this off camera before, and you've told me it's quite difficult for, say, a UK electrician to go to the US. Maybe not so much the other way around, which we'll get into, but could you just elaborate on that for me?
Right. I've my own experience. I've got to remember now. When I was a kid, I worked with my dad, who was an electrician. And obviously, joining the military, you have a progression of qualifications. Now, they have various stages in America, and it's quite regulated. And what I found is with my British qualifications, I can't just go back home and just start working as an electrician. They have each state, for instance, has a slightly different take on the code, they call it, for the regulations. So every state, and sometimes even every county, has different rules that govern whether you can just work on your own or whether you need to work for someone else. I think with the qualifications I have here now, I could probably work under a master electrician as an apprentice for, you know, very little money. But I couldn't just go carte blanche and just start picking up the tools and start doing work.
So what's classed as a master electrician in the US?
Right. You start off as an apprentice, and that's a 4-year apprenticeship. You have to have a certain number of hours, and you have to work under a master electrician during that time, and everything has to be documented. After the 4 years, you sit an exam, and with the grace of your boss, let's say, you then get your journeyman's license. At that point, you need to have that for at least 2 years, I think it is. Again, working under a master electrician. And then you can then obviously apply for your master's license. Now, your master's license would allow you to pretty much work anywhere in the industry. But then obviously it depends on what skill set you have and what sort of parts of the industry you work in. And then over and above that is a contractor's license, which again is another couple of years as a master electrician. And once you have a contractor's license, it basically means you can take on virtually any kind of work. You can hire people, et cetera, et cetera. So to get where I am in this country, let's say you're looking at a good 8 years.
Wow.
Now, I kind of did that here in a roundabout way myself. So it's not dissimilar. But because of that, if you were to go to America to work as an electrician, the first thing they're going to ask you is, do you got your journeyman's card? And if you say, what? They're going to go, sorry, mate, you can't do that. You might get a job as like a helper. And even then that's, is based on various things. So I found that it's actually, for America, it's quite difficult to make that leap. It's not impossible. But then obviously the other big thing with America is that it's all different than it is here. They use old school measurements. The wiring colors are all different. The house setups are built quite differently than they are here. So if you were just to go over to America as an electrician and go, yeah, I got this, you're going to find yourself out of your depth very, very quickly over there. In the first couple of weeks anyways. If you know what you're doing, you pick it up pretty quick, but you can't, you're probably better off going through an agency, having them vet your qualifications. You're probably still going to have to do some kind of a test. And then obviously the other things, like you've got licenses to pay for, you got bonds to be posted, and so I found that it's not as easy this way around. When I came over here, I showed all my qualifications to think it was BSI, and they allowed me to kind of skip a couple of years on the process because
almost
of my,
use it as merit.
yeah. So, but I still paid for all my training, all my testing, qualifications, things like that. So that took me quite a few years to kind of establish that. And then the problem I found, because I was too old to be an apprentice, but I did find a company that would take me on, not as an apprentice, but initially as a helper. And then I quickly was able to, once I got all my qualifications here, actually be an electrician. So yeah. I feel it was easier to come here to do that. But like Boyd said, but that was still quite a few years ago. And I think nowadays, I think it's probably much more difficult.
Even more so. Yeah. Boyd, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, like Dave says, that's potentially 8 years to be at the stage where you can go work for yourself. Do you think that is a good thing or possibly a bad thing?
Well, I was looking up last night, to be fair, about the terms of becoming an electrician in Australia. And they do have quite a similar process as to what David said regarding the sort of certificate to as a like become a routine Sparky, and then they have a completion certificate, and then you have to have a certificate of proficiency, and there are like a set sort of fee from up to 6 months to be a routine Sparky, up to 4 years to become a completion certificate, and I guess to sort of sign off your works. And again, you're not a real electrician unless you've done a lot of time on the tools and actually had that experience. I mean, there's lots of arguments at the moment about these sort of 5-week wonder courses, and you're not an electrician after you've done one of them courses. You might be able to wire a spur off of a ring main. That's it. You haven't done the experience. You haven't found faults and problems that you will come across every single day. You come across problems, and every day is a school day as a Sparky.
I can feel the comments coming in now saying, no, I've done the course, I'm brilliant.
No, they're not a Sparky after 5 weeks. And anybody who employs somebody who thinks that they're a Sparky, unfortunately, you're not.
Yeah. Do you think that the UK could learn a thing from places like Australia and the US in terms of maybe making it I wouldn't say a more difficult process, but a more lengthy process that will definitely vet the good ones out?
I think so, yeah. I think that, anything to make it tougher, because, let's face it, just because you can wire up a plug or a ring main or, a circuit doesn't mean that you're fully qualified. You have to know a massive amount of information. And like I say, the rules are changing all the time. We've got Amendment 2 coming out. We had the YouTube video the other day about Amendment 2. There's so much information going on. And every day is a school day for a Sparky.
Yeah.
Certainly abroad, speaking to my friend last night, who's from the UK, he's from Oldham, he's actually living out in Australia now, married with a child, and he said it's so tough out here now for compliance and making sure everything is correct. You can't just simply just jump in as a 5-week wonder course and say, give me a job, because unfortunately you won't get one.
Yeah. From both of your experience in your travels, have you ever found that you see many Brits in Australia, America, or vice versa? Australians working in the UK, Americans working in the UK?
David, I'll let you go.
Not in the electrical trade, no. I've seen people, I've talked to people who've gone over and just done bits and pieces, but not anyone who's really, say, gone over with a trade and made it work over there. And I suppose, on the other hand, I've always felt I've always been the odd one out, because any place I have worked, they're always like, whoa, what you doing over here? American over here doing English electrics, but.
Yeah. I found the opposite when I was traveling, and like I said, signed on with an agency in both countries as well, New Zealand as well as Australia. a lot of the Sparkies out there were all from different countries. I worked with people from Russia, from Scotland, from Czechoslovakia, all over the world, really. And one of the Russian lads, older chap, I did ask him the question, you know, what's it like working in Russia as an electrician? And he said, electricity flows the same way in Russia, you know. So, you know, as long as you get the basics and you grasp what you got to do, you know, electricity, you know, it still flows the same way.
Well, no, that's true. Do you find that the work that you carry out in these countries is similar fundamentally? So you go and consume unit to your sockets, your lights, everything.
Yeah, I mean, I know David was saying something about, you know, the sort of colours and the style of stuff in America is completely different. I'm on a Facebook group called, I think it's called Electrician Life, and it is mainly American stuff. And some of the mess that you see on, you know, like you see people putting caught on camera photos of bodge ups. Well, the American ones, that just looks like standard electrical work in America, if you ask me. But they're in Australia and New Zealand, we're harmonised colours, so we're still using the brown and the blue and the green and yellow, same as the UK. And they use all radial circuits for everything. They don't use ring finals for anything. I guess that's the same out in America as well.
Yeah, there's no ring mains in America. The biggest thing, obviously, is the wiring colors are all very different. A good example is my first experience here. Friend asked me to wire up a British plug. They said, "Oh, you're an electrician. You can wire this plug." So I'm looking at the wiring in this plug, and I'm seeing a green wire, a red wire, and a black wire. And I was very confused because in America, the black wire is live. The red wire would also be a switch live. And I was looking for a white wire, which would have been the neutral. And I didn't see it in this plug. And I was looking at it thinking, what in the hell is this? You know, and I'm thinking you got a hot and a switched hot and an earth cable. And I'm like, this plug's not going to work because where's the neutral? So I'm digging through. And as you can imagine, I said, well, you know, I was thinking 110 volts, we'll just plug it in, we'll wire it up, see what happens. And of course, it blew a fuse. That's when I realized, oh, it's 240 volts here. That's bad. That's not a good start.
Yeah, let's talk about that actually. Because over here, it's 230, 240 volt. What is it in the US and Australia?
Go, Dave.
Oh, right. US, most of your domestic circuits is going to be 110. But what they do in America is power comes into, like, say, your house, comes in at 240 or 220, depending. And then it comes in off of the transformer, and then they just tap it out. So you've got your 220. And then when it comes in the house, you can break that off to your 110. So most of the sockets and stuff, if they're under like 15 amps, they'll all be 110 volts. So your lights, sockets, and stuff like that. Then the 220 or 240 volts will be for any heavy appliances. So like washing machines, boilers, anything big runs off that in the house. So you've got basically two sets of voltages running through. But the higher voltages, obviously, they've got very different plugs. So it's not like anyone's going to accidentally touch anything. That stuff is normally kept away. Whereas anything that's easily accessible in the house is going to be 110.
Yeah. Have you been shocked off a 110?
Yeah.
hurts less than a 240, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
They're 60 hertz and we're 50 hertz.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Australia and New Zealand are 240 volts. You know, the same. I think they're 50 hertz, the same as ours. And I know that our appliances, if we take them over to Australia and New Zealand, you just use a converter, a plug converter. There's no, you know, sort of transformers involved for, like, you know, travel plugs and things like that. So yeah, regarding the sort of voltage and the frequency, it's the same as the UK. It was interesting, Matt, last night I had a quick look on Wikipedia of all places, and you just type in voltages across the world, and they show you a good map of all of the voltages in color format of the whole world. Is quite interesting.
Yeah, I've heard mixed things about the voltages. I've heard that the US wanted to go to 240, but because of how everything's done, they just thought, no, we'll carry on. But then I've also heard the same about the UK, that there was plans at one point to make the UK 110 to be similar to the US, but what you read and hear can be completely fabricated for all we know.
Yeah, I think the UK national grid is the biggest, if you like, installation across the whole world, more or less, for the same voltage, continuous for the whole of the UK, and for them to manage that, I mean, it's a phenomenal feat, really. I can't really remember the reasons why we stayed at 230 or 220 to 240.
I was talking to someone a while back. I don't know how true this is, but I think a lot of it is sort of when they were developing the grid and electric in houses and stuff, a lot of it had to do with electric heating. And I think someone might have thought, because the 240 volts obviously makes the electric heaters more effective. I also think it's probably down to, I think, because a lot of the hookup to a house in America, there's a lot more of it than what I've seen in this country. Here a lot of times, the service comes underground. You've got your fuse, your consumer unit here. Because like in America, I mean, you're pulling off of a tap, transformer that's coming into the house. The house itself might even have a part of that apparatus on the outside of the house running down to your meters, and then so it's a little bit more involved hooking up electric into American house, whereas I think in the UK it looks much easier. Maybe that's a reason for it.
Yeah, I think same as Australia and New Zealand, there's a lot more lines, power lines everywhere. It is visible, ugly. I mean, obviously we've designed ours, if you like, a little bit sort of before the infrastructure was built before, and like you say, underground. I mean, obviously, come sort of 2030, when we're apparently meant to be stopping burning fossil fuels, everything's going to be more or less electricity in the UK anyway. So to become an electrician in the UK or possibly worldwide, it's never a better time. But yeah, I think going away from fossil fuels and oil and gas, they're just going to put more demand on the national grid. So, and that's, I'm guessing, is going to happen across the world as well. So, yeah.
This may be a silly question.
To change if it's powers over line, over line head powers. Easier to adapt. Obviously, our system, there's still cables in the ground that are 70, 80-year-old, and they're still in service,
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, I was going to come on to earthing next, but I think that's one of the reasons there's so much talk about earth rods, isn't it? Because of the grid may not be up to scratch to where it needs to be.
I would have to say, in my experience so far, I'd be a bit concerned. A lot of the houses I've seen over here, like I said, they're 60, 70 years old. I don't think they're up. They're not. A lot of them are only 60 amp supplies coming into the house, and I'm sure you've seen it. You go into a house that was built in the 40s. You look at the electrics and you think, that service probably isn't much younger than that. And then they want to put in an electric car charging port. And you're like, well, you've already got a cooker, you've already got an immersion heater. You're going to add another 32 amp circuit to this. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. No.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of earthing, what's your experience of what they do in the US and in Australia? Is it similar to how we do it? Is it as basic as that, or
in Australia it is? I believe it's still the same. It's still the same. They call it bonding, more or less, the same as us. I think it's earthing in America, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bonding in Australia and New Zealand, same as here, really. But yeah, very similar. They still use adiabatic equations for earthing sizes. Same colour, so I didn't find it as long time ago now, 20 years ago, but it was exactly the same as it is here. Any extraneous parts need bonding. So yeah.
Is that the same for you, Dave?
Yeah, it's been a while, so I might not have the exact technical terms, but earthing and bonding, kind of what I remember, is kind of referring to the same thing. But I mean, a lot of houses in America would be classed as, in rural locations. So there's always an earth stake, or possibly some, maybe 2 or 3 spread out, or maybe even some, like what do they call it? It's like a grid, copper grid you might lay underground. But a lot of old houses will just have an earth stake or 2, somewhere near where the supply is coming into the house. Yeah,
that's probably something we're going to see more of here, especially, isn't it?
Well, that'll be interesting, because I've put quite a few in what I'd class as like suburban or city dwellings, and it's a bit difficult in some of them, to get an earth rod in, because there's no dirt anywhere to plug them in. There's been a couple of times we've had to actually dig out someone's back patio so that we can, dig down like, 2, 3, 4 foot before we can even get to dirt, so we can put an earth rod in. People who live out in the country, that's fine. They've got loads of space for that. But in the city, and then the other thing too is, like you said, if it's like blocks of flats or apartments, you're relying on the earth that is there for that building, and sometimes those aren't up to scratch, depending on how old the building is. So
yeah. How about,
always the worry as well is if you do start poking an earth rod in the ground, what are you going to hit?
Yes. Yeah, I've been lucky. I haven't damaged it, but I've known people who have done. You bang, bang, and then, ooh, that went through easy. Oh, old lead water pipe or something like that that's been there for 100 years. You've just gone through it, and it's like, uh-oh.
Well, maybe that will make good YouTube compilation videos of people hitting gas lines and sewage lines. We've got that to look forward to. Yeah, we might even get that on SGTV. We'll have to look into that.
Oh, and then my brother-in-law works for health and safety, and he's asked me some questions about things in the past. And you get like construction sites where they're clearing an old area to build, say, new flats or something like that, and you don't know what kind of stuff they're going to find when they start digging up the ground. They're finding, like you said, old gas lines, old electric lines. It's crazy.
Yeah. Saxon burial grounds, all sorts of stuff.
No such luck with that, no.
No. So what's the consumer unit scenario like over there, the situation? Let's start with you, Boyd, in Australia, from your experience. Is it very similar to here?
Exactly the same as here. And I found another little nugget out last night, which I think is absolutely fantastic. You cannot sell a property in Australia now without having at least a minimum of 2 RCDs on the consumer's unit. So if you're a landlord or a homeowner and you want to sell, you have to upgrade your electricity for the new owner moving in. So it's the onus is on the seller, not the buyer, which I think is the other way around here. We just say, well, look, if you're buying a house, it's up to you to upgrade it or pay for a condition report or etc. But this is the other way around. That there was a little note to say, well, if the property is going to be knocked down and rebuilt or renovated, obviously the service is not going to be in service, and you can get a letter from the electrician or the homeowner to say, we're not going to install RCDs for the fact of the property is not going to be in use.
Yeah.
As soon as you have to have certificates all up to date before you can sell the house, and I think that's fantastic. Split load fuse boards is what they're saying is 2 as a minimum, but they still use RCBOs on individual circuits as well.
Yeah, I've heard of incidents in this country where people have recently bought a house, the consumer unit's not very good, and rather than getting a proper electrician in to do the consumer unit, they've got their friend down the street to put a new one in who's can wire a bit here and there, And then when it comes to them selling that house, they're saying, oh, that was there when I got here, because they did it so soon after they moved in. And I'm guessing, like you say, in Australia, that sort of rules any possibility for that kind of thing to take place.
Yeah, it does. And again, you know, obviously we have regulation changes along the way, quite regularly, but I can't see why they couldn't consider swapping it around to the similar way that they do in Australia. I guess New Zealand's the same, because they very much, you know, sort of copy each other in terms of what they do in the two countries. And certainly making it safer for the new property owner moving in is got to be better. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're living in a property and it's unsafe, it's got to be better to make it safe for the next person than just saying, oh, well, that's your problem now. You know?
How about you, Dave? What's the consumer units like over in the US?
They're very different than they are here. Normally, it's the size of them. They're because they don't, like I say, they don't do ring circuits, so everything's radial coming off of one board. So it depends on the size of the house and the size of how many circuits there are. But they're normally massive things, you know, in the store cupboard or somewhere, you know, in the garage, maybe something like that. And they're just all classic, you know, big circuit breakers, you know, like 5, 10, 15 amp, 20 amps, things like that. I suppose the function of them is the same, but they don't call them RCDs over there. They call them ground fault interrupters, or GFI, something like that. And but a lot of times you might see them on the socket outlets themselves. Not so much that there's a main one on the board, but there'll be, like, you know, like the classic, they'll have a socket outlet in the bathroom next to the sink.
Oh.
But then that's got a GFI on it, so if it does trip, then, you know, you just reset it there. But some of the modern stuff now, they're incorporating that into the switches themselves. So the layout is different, but I guess the function's the same. So
okay, you've spoke to me before about how in this country anyone off the street can walk into a wholesaler or even a shed type DIY place and buy a socket, a consumer unit, cable, whatever they want. Now, that's not the case in the US, is it?
Not really. That was one of the things I found a bit disturbing over here, was like, say you go and they've got a section with consumer units, wiring, cleats, clips, tools, all kind of stuff. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
You could just, because like in America, I mean, I guess I'd say the important stuff, like a consumer unit, you have to go to an electrical wholesaler to buy that. And the first thing they're going to want to know is they want to see like your journeyman's card, or your, you know, are you authorized to even buy this? Because if you buy it, you know how to install it. So a lot of the wholesalers, for instance, you would actually have to present your card if they don't know you, for instance. I mean, wire, you could probably buy that. That's not too hurtful. But a lot of like switches, socket outlets, things like that, you know, you tend to, you go to a electrical wholesaler to buy it. You don't, you know, you don't buy it in Tesco's and have a go on the weekend, kind of thing.
I think in Australia, you have to be licensed to touch anything to do with electric. You're allowed to change a light bulb, but I don't even think you're allowed to change a socket if you've broken the socket front. We class it as a competent person in this country. If you're competent enough to do something, you can do it as long as you sign it off or certify it yourself under BS 7671. But in Australia, you have to have a license, because if anything happens afterwards and you've changed that socket front and you reverse polarity or something happens, obviously the person who was unlicensed will be the person getting done for it. It's certainly more stricter, I believe, in Australia than it possibly is here. And I agree with what you're saying. You know, go to a wholesaler, you should have a card or a, you know, set of qualifications to buy the gear. It's only a few years ago that I remember going and I saw they had a big panel up on the wall showing you how to wire a circuit. What's all that about? You know, that's just, they stopped doing it now. They can sell the gear, but they're not allowed to advise you as to how to do the job, because obviously if they do, then they sort of become liable for that.
Yeah.
I think the same as gas, you know, you should only be able to buy a gas boiler if you're a gas safe registered engineer. Personally, I don't think you should be buying a fuse board unless you're a fully qualified electrician or have a company that can prove that you can sign it off. Again, I'm 32 years in the game, and every single week I will go to somebody's property, domestic I'm talking, and I will see people have done jobs that haven't signed it off or done it properly. You know, a good thing with the private rented sector at the moment, a lot of these landlords have found over the years paying people who are the odd job man or the builder to do the work for them. And unfortunately, they're not an electrician and they haven't got it done properly. It's biting them on the bum big time.
Yeah. You've mentioned liability. I want to ask you both. Obviously, in this country, most self-employed people will have some form of public liability insurance. But what is the case? We'll start with you, Dave. What's the case in the US? What do you have to have?
It's a little bit confusing. I've never had to really go through the process, but they work on a bond system. So let's say you're an electrical contractor. You have to have a bond, they call it, a surety bond, I think it's called. It's kind of like depending on the county that you're working in, if you do a job and the persons aren't happy with what you've done, then they can make a claim against the bond that you posted for that job, or that your own personal bond. And I suppose it's kind of like insurance, but it just means like if you say rewired someone's house and they didn't like the color of the socket outlets that you used, you said, well, if you want anything else, it's going to be more. And they kind of argue against that. They could claim a bit of compensation back from that bond you posted. But it's more or less to protect, because as an electrician, you're licensed, and you're licensed by the county. So the bond is a way of the customer kind of claiming compensation kind of against you and not the state. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Because obviously, if they were to go sue the county, for instance, that's a big legal fight and fees involved and everything. But it's probably like, in addition to insurance, you have a bond and you pay a percentage of whatever that's going to be yourself. I've heard of people posting bonds, they're like 5-10 grand of their own money. Obviously, that's going to cover them for like $500,000 or something like that, in addition to having insurance. But then that's part of, obviously, if you're fully licensed and fully bonded, that pretty much means you're going to do a really good job. So when you are looking for an electrician in America, if he's like, who's your bond, who's you posted your bond with, and they like, don't know, then you might want to walk away. If they don't have any, if they don't have a license, for instance, again, you want to walk away. They come to the door. Whereas here, I think, like you said, you've got your public indemnity insurance and then obviously your liability insurance.
Yeah. Regarding Australia and New Zealand, I would imagine it's very similar to the UK or America, that you need obviously insurances to work. That's sort of given fact. Regarding a traveller, so for instance, if there's anybody watching and they want to go travelling to Australia, New Zealand and do work out there as a Sparky, it would just be your standard insurance that you would get, travelling insurance, which is what I, luckily enough, didn't have to use when I was out there. So one thing I would say, talking about insurances and getting yourselves covered before you go travelling or when you're working abroad, they do have different safe practices in Australia. So, for instance, they have a thing to do with working in people's roof spaces. So we call it a loft, they call it a roof space. You have to isolate the power before you go up into a loft in Australia, because they use a lot of different practices for open junction boxes. And obviously they have rodents like we have rodents. People chew through stuff. So there was a few deaths in Australia, where people have gone up into lofts and they put their hands on live cables, or live cables were touching parts that weren't bonded or earthed, and then so they've created a safe practice law. Like we have safe isolation, they do that out there as well, but they also have to switch the power off to any circuits that are serving a loft or a roof space.
It's probably best you just don't go in a loft in Australia anyway, because you're going to get eaten by spiders and God knows what anyway.
Widow, there's going to be a big snake, or that's one thing I learned when I was working. I didn't do much domestic in Australia when I was out there. New Zealand's fine because it's exactly the same as the UK. There's nothing out there that's going to kill you apart from probably electricity or people. But the Australia, you don't put your hands under the floorboards in Australia.
Yeah. Let's talk about money. So from your experience and to the best of your knowledge currently, who would you say pays the best for a self-employed electrician out of the UK, US and Australia?
If you're asking me first, I know for a fact that the wages in Australia are relevant to the cost of living, and I know the wages are very good for a Sparky. I certainly earned very good wages when I was working out there 20 years ago. Like I say, I probably only worked for about 9 months in Sydney through a couple of different agencies, and I earned enough money to last 3 months to travel the whole country in a camper van and fly into Ayers Rock and, up in the rainforests and stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. New Zealand, again, exactly the same. I was working in Auckland. It's the cost of living is relevant to where you are. So I was working in both cities, Auckland and Sydney. Both cities, cost of living was relevant for my rent, for my, living, and I would say, same over in the UK. You can earn good money as an electrician, and the cost of living probably is the same on the same par.
How about you, Dave, in the US?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Although I think looking up some of it depends again, like I said, where you work, where you live, what your living expenses are. But I think in general, electricians in America are on a better wage than what they are here. And I think it's because, like you said, the electrical work is quite regulated over there. And you do have to go through an awful lot to be an electrician, with time served and things like that. So it does seem like the money is better there. I don't know if I'd say it's like, it's noticeably different. There's noticeably more, but it's not, you could make, depending on what you're doing here, you could make similar money. But I think, I'd say it's probably a little bit more in America, but then it's a lot tougher to get in to it also. Yeah.
My final question to you both, slightly controversial question, so it's a good one to finish on. Which country would you say is better at electrics? Has the better safety, better pay, better practice out of the UK, USA and Australia? I'm going to start with you, Dave, seeing as you're already up on the screen. What would your answer be?
Wow. I'm not. I find it a difficult one to answer. I think most of my experience has been over here. To be fair, so I would probably have to say on a newly built new installation, I think the UK is much better. But it's a difficult one to put because, again, there's so much new stuff that you see in America that's coming out, and some of the ways that they do things slightly different to here. It's kind of, was it horses for courses, really? I don't know if I could say one or the other. But I would say most of my experience has been here in the UK. So I'm kind of edged towards that side because, I've done pretty well here for myself. So,
yeah. How about you, Boyd?
Well, I would say, knowing the new build game, sort of inside out up till about 5 years ago, for instance, the practices and the actually seeing some of these new build flats and houses, I'm finding that the standard of workmanship is shoddy and shocking. Now, having said that, we have come leaps and bounds for, you know, with RCDs on every circuit, and, you know, metal fuse boards, you know, fire clips on communals and things like that. So we are definitely getting better. Obviously, we're getting AFDDs in, surge protection devices, lots of things are coming in. But just going back to what we were talking about, Australia and their way that they have to have a license to work, they have to have, you know, certain qualifications and follow a proper apprenticeship. I'm going to say Australia. Okay. Because, like I say, speaking to my friend last night in Queensland, who was, like I say, from up the north in the UK, and he's out there working. He said it's far more stringent to become a Sparky out there. So I'm going to say Australia.
Okay.
It was upside down while I was talking to him, by the way.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a dad joke, that is, Boyd.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember many years ago, I was in a wholesaler that was getting a consumer unit for a job. And like you said, I noticed that with the old fuse boards going back into the 50s and the 60s, they did seem to take very good care in the way they put them together. Whereas ones that I've changed that had been done in the 90s, what is going on here?
I know.
And whereas here, like, for instance, you can't buy gas things without having a gas safe license. I think that should be the same for electric. I just remember this guy, there was 3 or 4 of us in the wholesalers. I was buying some stuff, and this guy was buying a consumer unit, and he was there, and he was asking some really kind of dumb questions. And then he was asking the guy at the counter, well, what kind of wire do I need for this consumer unit? And the guy just kind of put his hands on the counter. He went, look, if you don't know the answer to that question, maybe you should get an electrician to install this. And he says, where am I going to find an electrician? And he went, well, there's 3 of them standing right behind you. And we're all standing there like,
we don't want to know.
I don't even know. Don't even talk to me. I'm not even going to quote for that. So it's just like, and I think that's the thing. I think it should be more stringent in England. I think it should be, you need a license for electricity. I know a lot of people who think, oh, it's just a bunch of wires. How many jobs have you gone to fix a light that they've had a go at that doesn't work? And they hand you a bunch of red sleeves. These fell out.
Yeah, but I get the phone calls. Oh, I've put a light up, and now all of a sudden it's not working. And it worked absolutely fine before I touched it. And I'd say, well, why did you touch it?
Yeah. So I suppose from what both of you have told me so far, each country has its strengths, each country has its weaknesses. There's definitely room for improvement. A lot of the things you've said about the UK especially, I hear a lot, you know, in terms of safety, who should be able to buy equipment, who should be able to touch equipment and appliances. So there's definitely room for improvement. But I want to thank both of yourselves, Boyd and Dave, for coming on the show. It's been brilliant to have you on. I hope anyone out there has found that useful. As always, please make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification button if you want to see more from us here at SGTV. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.